So thank you all for being here with us for the second part of our Iraq Plus 20 event to commemorate the large international protests against the US invasion of Iraq 20 years ago. We are, of course, also looking towards the future of the peace movement and how we move forward from here. Without any further ado, I will give the floor over to Rainer Braun, who is our moderator for our conversation with Noam Chomsky. Thank you, Rainer.
Thank you, Gene, and thank you, Noam Chomsky, that you have take time for us and be with us today at such an important meeting. To introduce Noam Chomsky, I think I will not do it. I will only say that we all were listening to Noam Chomsky 20 years ago, when he was the voice of the peace and international anti-war movement against the illegal attack against Iraq. And today, we ask Noam Chomsky to say some words to the time 20 years ago, but also to the lessons learned for the peace movement and the peace activists today. Noam, the floor is to you. We ask you to speak about 20 minutes. The floor is to you. It is great that you are with us, and it's again a pleasure to have you in our group to help us finding our new ways for the peace engagement in the future. Noam, the floor is to you.
Thank you very much. We might begin by recalling the Nuremberg judgment. Aggression is the supreme international crime, differs from other war crimes only in that it encompasses all of the evil that follows. We might also recall the admonition to the tribunal by Justice Robert Jackson, chief US prosecutor at Nuremberg. He said, "We are handing the criminals a poisoned chalice, and if we ever carry out the supreme international crime, we must sip from it or concede that the trial of the Nazi war criminals was a farce, mere victor's judgment." Well, the US invasion of Iraq was a textbook example of the supreme international crime. Like all acts of aggression, this one also had an official reason, what the perpetrators called the single question: will Iraq abandon its development of nuclear weapons? The question was quickly answered the wrong way. The perpetrators of the crime reacted. President Bush performed a little skit in which he searched under the desk, behind the door, couldn't find weapons. The assembled press and dignitaries laughed at the amusing joke. Few bothered to remember Washington's love affair with Saddam while he was carrying out his worst crimes. This was culminated by President Bush #1's invitation to Iraqi nuclear engineers to come to the United States to learn advanced techniques of nuclear weapons production. Convenient amnesia is one of the prerogatives of power, along with amusement at one's own awful crimes. The single question was dropped, and it turned out that it was replaced by the discovery that the United States goal all along had been the noble objective of bringing democracy to suffering Iraqis. That instantly became received wisdom, remains so today. A Gallup poll in Iraq found that some Iraqis agreed. 1%, 5% felt that the United States invaded to help Iraqis. The rest assumed that the United States was interested in Iraq's rich petroleum resources. In the United States, the required belief is that the US mercy mission would have taken place even if Iraq was producing lettuce and asparagus and the center of global oil production was in the South Pacific. There were, of course, consequences, including hundreds of thousands of corpses, vast destruction, terror and torture, incitement of Shia-Sunni conflicts that have torn the country apart far beyond, all part of the evil that follows. There's no lack of criticism of the US war. Barack Obama is greatly honored because he condemned the war as a strategic blunder. He was echoing Russian generals who criticized the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in the same words. Also Nazi generals who regarded a two-front war as a blunder, should have taken out England first. One will have to search hard in the mainstream to find a sharper criticism. In fact, it's now considered highly improper even to comment on the Iraq war, especially now that orders are to focus on the unique criminality of the reincarnation of Peter the Great, planning to conquer Europe unless we stop him in Ukraine. In fairness, we must recognize that there is debate about the Iraq war. Recently, there's been much ado about Harvard University's rejection of Human Rights Watch Director Kenneth Roth for a position at the Harvard Kennedy School. It was quickly rescinded under protest. Roth's credentials were lauded. He even took the negative position in a debate moderated by the noted human rights advocate Samantha Power, a debate on whether the Iraq invasion qualifies as humanitarian intervention. Michael Ignatieff, the director of the Carr Center of Human Rights at Harvard, argued that it did qualify as humanitarian intervention. The undisciplined might ask how we would react to a similar performance today at Moscow University. The noble mission to rescue Iraqis is commemorated in other ways. One of its most atrocious crimes was the attack on Fallujah. That was actually well covered in the national press. Give a couple quotes to give the general picture. The attack was launched, the New York Times reported, by seizing Fallujah's only hospital. It happens to be a war crime, which was unmentioned. Continuing, patients and hospital employees were rushed out of the rooms by armed soldiers, ordered to sit or lie on the floor while troops tied their hands behind their backs. The offensive also shut down what officers said was a propaganda weapon for the militants, Fallujah General Hospital, with its streams of reports of civilian casualties. Can't allow that. City's 2 medical clinics were also bombed and destroyed. A couple days later, quoting the Washington Post, electricity and water were cut off to the city just as a fresh wave of bombing strikes began. The Red Cross and other aid agencies were also denied access to deliver the most basic of humanitarian aid, water, food, emergency medical supplies to the civilian population. A New York Times editorial condemned the use of white phosphorus. It's Willie Peter, as it was affectionately called when it was being used to remove Vietnamese peasants who were in the way. Quoting the editorial, packed into an artillery shell It explodes over a battlefield in a white glare that can illuminate an enemy's positions. It also rains balls of flaming chemicals, which cling to anything they touch and burn until their oxygen supply is cut off. They can burn for hours inside a human body. Well, that's the general flavor. And it's not forgotten. The Navy, US Navy, just commissioned its latest acquisition, the USS Fallujah, an amphibious assault vessel named to commemorate the assault, which the official press release calls the fiercest urban combat involving US Marines since the Vietnam War's Battle of Hue City. Marine Corps Commandant David Berger adds that, quoting him, under extraordinary odds, the Marines prevailed against a determined enemy who enjoyed all the advantages of defending in an urban area. The Battle of Fallujah is and will remain imprinted in the minds of all Marines and serves as a reminder to our nation and its foes why our Marines call themselves the world's finest. And not everyone is so entranced. Iraqis, for example, reflecting on the commissioning of the USS Fallujah, Iraqi journalist Nabil Salih describes a football field, I'm quoting him now, known as the Martyrs' Cemetery. It's where residents of the once besieged city of Fallujah buried the women and children massacred in repeated United States assaults to repress a raging rebellion in the early days of occupation. In Iraq, even playgrounds are now sites for mourning. The war entailed showering Fallujah in depleted uranium and white phosphorus. But US savagery didn't end there. Salih continues. 20 years and incalculable birth defects later, the US Navy is naming one of its warships the USS Fallujah. That is how the US empire continues its war against Iraqis. Fallujah's name, bleached in white phosphorus, implanted in mothers' wombs for generations, is a spoil of war too. What is left is the haunting absence of family members, homes bombed into non-existence, photographs incinerated along with the smiling faces. Instead, a lethally corrupt system of cross-sectarian camaraderie and theft was bequeathed to us by the unpunished war criminals of Downing Street and the Beltway. Through this historical revisionism, Salih concludes, the US has launched another assault on our dead. Walter Benjamin had warned us, even the dead will not be safe from the enemy if he wins. The enemy has won. Well, the enemy may well have won in the doctrinal system of the aggressors, but how the victory will be remembered is up to us, along with the lessons we can learn and that we can apply to the current world. Thank you.
Norm, thank you so much for these impressive words, which I think underlined the importance of our event today, remembering what's happened 20 years ago, and also see to the future of our future activities and future actions. I think our voice is even more needed than ever, And I can only say thank you so much for your words again. They are helping developing the new peace movement under the new circumstances. And I wish you all the best, Norman. And I will give the floor back to Jean Connor for the next round of our meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Noam and Raina. We now have our final roundtable for the day. This roundtable's theme is where do we go from here? Challenges the peace movement faces currently. We have our two moderators joining us, Emily Rubino and Ivan Silyuanov. Excuse my pronunciation there, and you can correct me if you'd like, as well as a great selection of panelists here. I do have to excuse Baroness, who unfortunately will not be able to join us today due to some internet connectivity problems. However, in her place, we have Ernest Gibson from Ghana, from the organization GLOPAG, and also a board member of the International Peace Bureau. And the other speakers, just to quickly name them here, we have Yanar Mohammed, we have Azia Marquez, we have Bruno Langiani, Lindsay German, Jose Nivoy, and then our two moderators. So I'll turn the floor over to the moderators to begin the panel. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Very, very happy to see everyone here. It is definitely an exciting event for me to moderate with Emily, my co-moderator today. So we are excited. So a little bit about ourselves, maybe to start off our discussion here. So my name is Ivan. I work in advocacy and education for nuclear disarmament, managing projects aimed to bridge trust gaps between individuals and kind of create new spaces for intergenerational and international dialogue on disarmament and emerging technologies too. So I'm part of a wonderful team at Youth Fusion that brings together young professionals from different walks of life to put youth at the forefront of the disarmament movement. I'm incredibly happy to facilitate the session today with Emily, as I'm personally grappling with the question how we can make peace movement accessible for those who really are barely involved, but really are willing to pitch in. Emily, over to you. Could you please also introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ivan. Thanks, everyone, for having us here today. Really excited to co-moderate this session. As you might be able to tell from looking at Ivan and myself, we were quite young 20 years ago. I myself was 8. Ivan was even younger. So, you know, it's, I think, a real honor and privilege to be here. I was able to tune in this morning, reflecting back on the 2003 demonstrations, and I'm really glad that we can be here with a range of panelists from different experiences and backgrounds and ages to talk about where we are today, how we move forward, what has changed between 2003 and now, and some of the challenges that we're facing that are unique to this moment. So again, welcome everyone. And maybe with that, just acknowledging that we're all coming from different ages and backgrounds. A question I really wanted to kind of kick us off with to kind of ground us and get a sense of the background of some of our panelists is if each of you could maybe start with what your entry into the peace movement or into anti-war work was, and maybe give us a time frame of when that was. So yeah, maybe we'll start with who I see first on my screen, who is Yanar.
Thank you, Emily. I remember I was a student doing my postgraduate program when the bombs fell on our heads in Baghdad. And that was in 1990, starting with Bush the father. I was not connected to the peace movement until I got a taste of those bombs and what it means that you are a mother of a baby, you are terrified, you don't know what to do with your family and with your older parents, and how it can come out of the blue and across the oceans that somebody decides to bomb your city, and there you are, you're in the middle of bombs. And it's a wake-up call that nobody can be safe if not involved in knowing what happens around the world. I don't like to use the words politics or democracy anymore, especially the word democracy is a terrifying word for us in Iraq. So that was my beginning. Then I became part of the anti-war movement, then got political awareness, then founded an organization for women. I called it Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. And from there on, and it continues. I hope I didn't take too much time.
No, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Lindsay, would you like to share next?
Sure, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's really good to be here. I was born in the years following the Second World War. I was born in 1951. I was born in London. My primary school still had air raid shelters, which obviously were used for storing old desks and so on, but you couldn't really avoid questions of war. And of course, my generation grew up with the threat of nuclear war very, very obvious, and particularly the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was, well, I was, 10 or 11 when that happened, and people talked about it, and people were very, very frightened about it. So I suppose my first direct contact with a current war was the Vietnam War, which my generation, very large numbers of them, opposed it. And I became a socialist, and I became involved in solidarity with the Angolan people after Mozambique, after the Portuguese Revolution and so on. And so I've always been anti-war in that sense. I got involved quite closely in the Yugoslav War in 1999 in campaigning against that, because I saw that very much as the beginning of a much more aggressive set of wars. And then in 2001, after 9/11, myself and a handful of other people, we set up the Stop the War Coalition, where we held a very, very big meeting, which everyone said you can't really campaign after 9/11, but we found, while we got a lot of opposition, there was also a lot of people saying we have to do something. And so we created the movement from there, and it involved wider and wider numbers of people. And that was really how we got started on the road to February the 15th, 2003.
Very, very insightful, actually. I personally believe that, well, such events as, well, the Second World War, for example, have impacted many of our participants. But I would really like to move forward to our younger participant from Russia, Asya. Could you also please unmute yourself and share your perspective on the events in your work and your contribution to the peace movement?
Yeah, I think that I became a peacemaker when I was 6 or 9 years old, I would say, because it was first time when I saw refugees. I lived at the time in the republic near Chechnya, and it was the time of the started Chechen war, and I saw that people who were seeking for homes, they were desperate people who lost everything, their homes, their close people. And it was, I think, the first time when I decided that I always will fight for keeping peace. But actually, I am my profession is psychologist, and I am working on making peace, to helping people to make peace inside of them, for then they can build peace with their in other places within their families and communities. But last year, before February, me and my colleagues, I have many colleagues from different countries, we decided to make groups of support for our Ukrainian colleagues, because at that time they asked us, they felt the same way desperate, and they asked us to organize something like a group of support, a circle of support, where took participation those people who were affected by the Chechen war, and also other our colleagues, psychologists, activists. And before starting the invasion, these groups, they worked well, and then we stopped that because it was very, very difficult for Ukrainian colleagues to communicate with us, because we're Russians. That's how I was involved in peace building movement. like I said.
Great. Thank you for your input, Asia. Let's move on to our next speaker. Let me just open my screen here, Ernest Gibson Cordazzi, who is here and initially the guest that was supposed to talk today, Barnes Dayan Echo Adona, could not attend, and he pitched in very quickly and agreed to talk to us today. Welcome, Ernest.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I'm really happy to join this panel, even though it was so quick for me to join. But however, we make progress. Yeah. So as part of the younger generations, as are now today in Africa, we look at things differently from Africa, from an African perspective. For example, when we talk about war in Africa, it's different from war in Europe. When we talk about conflict in Africa, you know, everything is so different. So me being a grown young man, you know, we only hear speculations where you will hear others talking about war, this, that, you know. The only thing that hits us so much here in Africa is diseases and sickness. For example, we talk about Ebola and other sicknesses that comes around. Those are the things that comes. And when it comes, it just hit the borders of Ghana. We are so fortunate in Ghana that don't really get some of these deadly diseases to attack us or to break through the walls of Ghana. So somehow I said we are in a safer environment here in Ghana. But when we talk about our neighbors, like I said, we sit back and we hear speculations, which we do not know what is what. So when I start to embark onto this journey of pursuing peace, I started volunteering with some organizations, started getting information about how things are going on with my previous organizations, where we meet people and victims from other African countries who come with their problems. You look at them and you do not understand, you don't know what to do. So we look at these problems and, you know, we become so devastated and we sit back trying to look for solutions in making peace here. Now, there is a saying we say in Ghana here, when you see your neighbor's beard burning, you quickly put yours in water. So the question now becomes, how do we get ourselves ready to prevent peace in Ghana in case of any circumstances or any of these problems approaching us? But however, with that withstanding, how are we going to stand to even support our neighbors in case of these atrocities? So with this whole thing going on, I decided to quit my job. I'm a crane operator by profession, but I quit my job, getting to a level, leaving everything from behind, and I decided to pursue the cause of peace because looking at it from the younger generation, I thought money was everything because I even have to quit school because I look at the direction where I would earn a lot of money because I believe money was everything. But when I got to that direction and I realized, yes, I had the money, but there is a lot of things happening around us that money cannot solve, then I have to even drop my profession. That is how serious it got to me. I have to leave my job and start to pursue peace, to look for what we call peace and how to maintain it. You know, so looking at things happening around us in Africa, it's very devastating, and looking at how people are affected. Joining IPB, I have seen a lot of things, and I've traveled quite long with IPB, and IPB have also opened my eyes to also come into the realization of a lot of things happening in the world and Africa. So even in that regards, then we have decided to also put our guards on to pursue the peace, to make sure we go in our own way. There are a lot of things they say we cannot do, but in our own small way, we can also try to prevent some things from happening.
Great, thank you so much, Ernest, for sharing that. Bruno, would you like to go next?
Yes, first I would like to thank the invitation and congratulate IPB for the event. My name is Bruno. I come from São Paulo, Brazil, and I was born in '82, the year of one of the biggest and latest conflict in the South America, with which was the Malvinas War between Argentina and the UK. But the first conflict I remember, like more vivid, is the Kuwait Iraq conflict, and this was the conflict that made me like choose my undergrad, that was international relations, and decide to understand more this kind of situation. But it was later on 2012 that I joined Soda Paz Institute and started working like full time in this kind of tasks. And I second Ernest here when he says that we understand like conflict differently than maybe Europe, and the types of challenges that we have here in Brazil in that we work, it's much more in terms of local conflicts and armed violence, and the way we from Soda Paz try to like support the peace movement here and elsewhere. I believe what brings these worlds together, it's the work trying to enhance and invest more on like peace treaties, and especially in how to regulate conventional weapons. So Soda Paz was really much involved in different negotiations in the UN, but especially in the Arms Trade Treaty. That's a pretty recent treaty that has come to force, and it's something that has can have a huge impact on like more traditional conflicts and war, like what is happening nowadays in Ukraine, in Yemen, but also in local perspective in places where we suffer more for like, let's say, urban violence and political violence, but in like a domestic perspective. So that's a little bit the background on how I got touched by the subject, and a little bit of a flavor of what we are doing here from Soda Paz Institute. And I will finish that, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Bruno, so much for your input. Now that we've kind of looked back a little bit at your work and your contribution throughout the years, I wonder what, in your opinion, has really changed between, let's say, 2003 in the light of the invasion of Iraq and now. Are there any challenges that we are facing right now that we were not facing, let's say, 10, maybe 20 years ago? Could you please a little bit elaborate on that and maybe tap into your own experience? Yanar, you're the first on my screen.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I can elaborate on that. In 2003, although it was an imperialist war and it caused so much devastation, but in Iraq, we were able to decide the first steps of the future that we want to have. And although the imperialist powers came with the pretext of eliminating the fundamentalists, but they created another fundamentalist government, and they allowed them, they unleashed them on the people. So in 2003, we were able to step out in the public squares, demonstrate, say that we don't want this, we want that. We want jobs for the people. As long as we are the country of all the riches and the oil, we want the jobs for the people, and we want freedom for women, we want equality. We were able to do that. But in this year, and I'm taking like a leap of 20 years, in this year, we went out in the streets and we did a demonstration in defense of Mahsa Amini, who should be allowed to look like a normal woman without the veil on her head. And me and my colleagues, we got an arrest. My colleagues and I got an arrest warrant, and I've just left Iraq, came to Canada, a few days ago, and it turns out that I'm a criminal because I'm expressing my opinion. So what's happened in the 20 years is that I can speak of Iraq, but I think it's a general situation. The governments have become much stronger and oppressive against their people. Expressing your opinion is no longer what it used to be. And the freedoms that we seek and that we demand are not so easily, we don't get any answers at all. And the impunity of the governments of not feeling that they are accountable to give responses or answers to the people has become so clear. In Iraq, we have been speaking about articles of the law that allow the killings of women. And these articles are very clear to us, and we are giving all the documents to the legislators, and they just don't care. They still have in our laws 2 or 3 articles that allow the killings of women. And the violence against women has surged so high under the militarism that has become rampant in Iraq. It is also supported by the militia culture, where every political group, and here I'm speaking about those who were empowered by the invasion of Iraq, the militias of those groups have become so strong that they are much stronger than the government. We have total chaos. We underwent a parallel of the Arabic Spring in Iraq that was counterproductive. It was used by the ruling political parties to recycle themselves and become stronger. I see that the space of struggle for freedoms is much less now. We find ourselves escaping arrest warrants and lawsuits from the highest levels of the government, and we are being held accountable for the mere fact that we speak, we utter words of equality, freedom, and the people's rights to jobs. It's a very, we feel that the crisis is spreading out to many countries in our region and also to the outer world, and the COVID-19 did not help. The recent economic developments did not help, and but still, as many of those who struggle for a better day, we always have to go back to the drawing board and we plan it out again as to what can be done at this time. Of course, it has to be done between arrest warrants and all the intimidation that the militia government puts against us. But there will always be hope. There will always be planning with our comrades in the movement, with the socialists around us, with the unionists around us, and there is always hope. We never lose hope.
Thank you so much for highlighting this. Indeed, harder grip on power of our leaders, curtailed freedom of speech. I now want to kind of turn the conversation to Lindsay, because you are a very vocal activist. Have you felt the repercussions of these events yourself that Yanar has just pointed out? What's your take on the current challenges that we're facing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Yanar that I think that if you look at governments worldwide, there's been a drive to militarism worldwide. There's now double the spending on arms worldwide than there was 20 years ago. And if you look at countries like Brazil or like Saudi Arabia, a very big increase. We know that Germany and Japan are rapidly increasing their military spending over the next period, allegedly over the war in Ukraine, but actually as part of a kind of new Cold War. And I think there's also governments are finding repressive ways of stopping people demonstrating, stopping people speaking up for themselves. With our government in Britain, we've got lots of strikes at the moment, and they're trying to make it harder for people to go on strike. So I think those things are all true, although you've got to remember that even in 2003, there were a lot of attempts to stop demonstrations. We had that, our government tried to stop us marching in Hyde Park which is the traditional place of demonstrations, because they said it would damage the grass. So, they find all sorts of pretexts for these kind of things. I suppose the biggest single thing I would say in terms of questions of war and peace is that if you look at the Yugoslav war, if you look at the beginning of the war on terror, you had really, they weren't equal opponents. You had American imperialism, the British, which is much smaller than America, but still one of the biggest military powers and has all the legacy of empire and everything, going against the Afghanistan, the Taliban, who didn't have an air force. So you knew what the outcome of it was going to be. In Iraq, which was a much more developed country militarily, you also, and had major war with Iran, obviously, in the 1980s, you knew that it would be, that the American firepower in particular would be overwhelming. I think what's the difference now is you're seeing growing tensions between whatever you want to call them, whether you want to call them all imperialist powers, or with Russia and the US, or with China. You are talking about very, very big military powers with nuclear weapons on both sides. So that is a new development, I think. And I think one of the things that I know, there are very different positions on this with governments. If you look, governments in Europe and the US are obviously in North America, are very much behind the sending of arms to Ukraine and shooting down the Chinese spy balloons and all the other things that have been going on. It's very, very different, I know, when you look at various other countries, from India to Brazil. So that's obviously a question. And there's a division. There are people, a majority of people, I guess, supported Ukraine against Russia in Europe, but of course lots of people don't want more weapons to be sent. This is a big issue in Germany, as I'm sure you've already discussed earlier in the debates today. So I think this brings the war on the world into a much more dangerous place, actually, than it has been, and does threaten the possibility of a much bigger war. I don't want to say a world war, because you always feel that you're sounding a bit sort of over dramatic, but at the same time, when I look at some of the comparisons with particularly the start of the First World War, when people said that they sleepwalked into war, that all the alliances and all the different positions that different countries had, they suddenly found this was going in that direction. I think we do see some elements. I don't want to exaggerate this, obviously. I don't want to be alarmist, and I do think there's a lot we can do. I think it's always the people of the world who stood up against war, precisely because they see what the consequences of war are, and there's people here obviously who've got much more direct experience of that than I have. But I think that definitely we are in the most dangerous place, and it's moving in a bad direction. That's my take on it, really.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for sharing that. Kind of pivoting now from being an adult these past 20 years to being someone who has kind of grown up these past 20 years in a world that has, as you've mentioned, become increasingly embedded in militarism, increasingly fascist. I'm wondering, Asya, if you want to go next and talk a little bit more about what it's like to kind of have grown up with this as the background, and now to be at this moment in time, and how you're seeing that.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with Yanar, because I agree that the main challenge is the criminalization of peace-building movements, for example, in Russia. And due to the last laws with fuzzy wording and with wide definitions of some words in the law, we came to the situation when anyone can be like a criminal. So it means that people are afraid even to express their opinion in social media or in any way. But it make peace building activists to be more creative. To be more creative and to find new ways of expressing themselves. And as a psychologist, I would say that I am worried about turning all the connections and about the destroying of relationships between people from different countries, cultures, because of war. And I believe that any war and any conflict is a collective trauma, which must be healed. And I think we don't give enough efforts for healing these traumas, because when you don't heal collective traumas, they pretend to repeat again. And it's just from my psychologist perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Asya. I'm really, as an activist from Russia working on nuclear disarmament issues, it really is a huge challenge. And kind of answering the question myself and kind of attaching them to your words, it really is a problem of like creating spaces, because for the most part, for example, disarmament movement in Russia is basically non-existent because people, on the one hand, really are not educated enough to engage in it, and on the other hand, they are really, oblivious to the fact that there are spaces where they can express themselves. Sometimes it's also a problem, especially in such societies, for example, is in Russia. And what my organization I'm doing is actually creating these spaces right now. Is maybe we'll definitely discuss, the future premise and context of the challenges later with you. But then I'd also want to address the same question to Ernest, who also works in engagement and advocacy in the African region. What's your take on this, and how have the challenges really shifted, and are there any overlaps, so to speak?
Okay, thank you so much. And once again, I would be sincere, and speaking from the perspective of Africa and Ghana, to be precise, I have not seen any change, to be sincere, because the only things we can speak of right now is we look at some basic things, like, for example, we had 2000 and let's say 2010 BMW. Then in today's world, we are driving a 2023 BMW. Those are the faces that keep changing. But when we talk about the main topics on the ground, we haven't seen anything different, because whatever that was happening then is just modernized into today's life, where you will see a lot of organizations has come together. When I started to take up the cause of peace with my organization, we tried from several dimensions, and we cannot penetrate, because at the end of the day, there are leaders ahead of you who would give you permissions to do some sort of things to also impact the other generations, or even the youth, the upcoming youth. They would not let you. And we try diverse ways. You will try anyway, they would not allow you to go. Now, it got to a point where I have to leave my previous organization and form a federation of which we currently have 128 different organizations from within West Africa. Now, this federation is formed with a perspective of coming together to speak the same language and sing the same song and march together. But because we believe when we are together, our voices will be much stronger and will be heard better than going on a single lane. But now, even with this, there are situations where you try to implement some things to benefit our own selves, but it's quite difficult. We try to move forward. A lot of organizations has come up trying to do what we are doing. But the problem now is nobody is prevailing. If you are talking of conflict and war, we have a lot of hidden conflicts in Africa. I cannot speak for other parts of the world, but in Africa, we have a lot of things going on which is not exposed to the world. For example, the other day I was having a conversation with Sean, and I have to explain to him how we have villages in Ghana who are creating weapons. There is an organization from the US who came to buy, the old weapons and take them out of the system, in other ways to prevent us from fighting each other, killing ourselves and all that, to make peace prevail. But you would be shocked to see some of these organizations. We have local organizations here who would, instead of giving out the old weapons, they give them up, then they create a factory creating more weapons to be selling, because if you sell it, you make a lot of money. So looking at this, the system yesterday was just modernized to what we are living in today. So if you would ask me sincerely, I tell you, I have not seen any change. We are now trying to stand to find our way of penetrating through the system by joining hands together with other organizations, and also with the support of IPB. Our voices are also being heard. Then we try to work our ways through to see what we can do. And even with that not guaranteed, the little we can do, I believe, would impact a few people. Someone asked me before about if we would be able to get through to the world. And I told them, yes, one day we would. But as of now, it is quite difficult because the leaders we have in Africa right now, excuse my language, but are so corrupted to an extent that I tell you, Africa is not going to change today because the corrupted leaders are grooming other corrupted leaders. So they continue to train them, and when they leave office, these people come to replace them and continue the bad deeds. Then in that regard, you can tell me whether we are going to make any progress or not. Other than that, then a few of us, I asked a few people before if I could have probably 2 or 3 people who could think like me. Then I realized that there are a lot more people who are like that, but they have no means to come out. So in that regard, we are also trying to point out ourselves, to educate ourselves more, because in today's world, if you come to Africa right now and we talk about violence, war, conflict, and all that, nobody is going to convince me with even $100 billion to hold a gun onto another person's head to shoot him because the money is enough for me. I am not going to do it. But we have other generations, and we have the younger ones who are there, who are hungry, because they say a hungry man is an angry man. If the guy is hungry on the street and I pass by and I give him $1, hey, you get this and buy some food to eat. Once they are able to eat that food at that moment, I take their attention. Then I can be able to pollute their head or to tell them what to do. You take the gun, go shoot this person, come back, I will be able to give you this. And also not talking of power drunkardness, where our leaders are fighting for power. They gain power, and it becomes a whole lot of problems here because this power they acquire, they have forgotten that when we speak of leaders, leaders are servants, but we bring them in power, then we continue to serve them instead of they coming to serve us. So there has been a lot of lack of education in this sector and a whole lot of things going. So sincerely, to cut this brief, I said, I have not seen any progress yet, but I hope in the future we will see some progress. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ernest, for that very frank and honest opinion. Still, I'm asking, this question was about new challenges, but there's certainly still some of the same things we're still trying to chip away at. So I appreciate your work on that. On that note of corrupt leaders, Bruno, I'd love to turn it to you. Even just, this past Brazilian election, we've seen that it's possible to turn away from corrupt fascist leaders back to something better. So I'd love to hear your takes both on that election and just like the larger challenges on the ground in Brazil.
Yeah, thanks. I believe like trying to compare like the periods and trying to bring to the current discussion. I believe when I was growing in the 2000s, my perspective is that we felt that we're in a wave moving inadvertently to like democracy, to like humans development, and there was a bigger faith in multilateral spheres and things like that. And when we like see now what's happening in several places like Hungary, like what happened in the US with the capital invasion, what happened in Brazil with Bolsonaro, this for us is like awakening moment to see that, to learn that we have to fight in a daily basis to sustain like the victories and the values that we want. So work for every day for peace, for rejecting authoritarian movements, rejecting intolerance and things like that. And in Brazil, like it was needed a really big alliance of different sectors in order to overcome this period. And I don't think we can say we are safe now. There's still a lot to do in order to maintain this. And I also wanted to talk quickly about one other like frustration that I think, because I believe we had expectations that the new technologies would bring us together, will allow us to know better other cultures and get together. And this proved to be not so true in the end. In a way, I remember all the discussion about the possibility of having a video of a war, and the first time that we could have like real-time broadcasting from the field of conflict. And now we have everything, and people doesn't depend on broadcasts, on big companies to do it. We can do it in our mobile phones. So of course we can see like a pro side of this, but at the same time, I also feel that we kind of banalized and people got like so used and tired that it's harder now to sensitize the persons to get together and to fight for peace and to build peace. So this is something, I don't know if all my colleagues agree, but it's something that I've been reflecting a lot. And just one more thing that's also, I think it's really challenging for us. And for me, it really bothers me. It's that how some conflicts move the agenda and move countries much more than others. And I'm not just saying like trying to like build peace and negotiate what we see like all the coalition in Ukraine right now, but also in the perspective of helping the victims. So I'm telling about Brazilian perspective. We could gather much more support for receiving migrants from Ukraine, people who are fleeing from the conflict, than we can, for example, together from people that are coming from the Afghan conflict, from Syrian conflict, from Somalia. So this is something that we have to discuss, how we can like gather the energy to support all the conflicts, regardless on the color of the persons who are victims, on the religion of those persons. So this is something that I believe that the peace movement has also to take care, so that we can be fair and support all the persons in need. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Bruno, for raising that point. That's definitely something that I'm seeing here in the U.S. as well. And I think the point Jeremy Corbyn made this morning as well. There's so many updates and so much coverage of Ukraine, which is certainly important, but there's so many other conflicts and wars, all of the hidden conflicts Ernest was talking about in Africa, the war in Yemen, Syria is now back in the news because of the earthquake, but conflict in Syria has been kind of off of the radar for a while too. So I think it is really important to examine who is getting this attention and look at the reasons why, racism being a huge one there. So I wanted to turn it now. Obviously, we are facing many challenges. A lot of them we're all facing across the globe. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And Yanar, you began to touch on this when you were wrapping up your comments, turning more to the side of hope, on the fact that we do need to keep working. And so I kind of wanted to bring that energy back and talk about hope and ask each of you, what work are you doing or seeing now that excites you that is bringing you hope for this current moment. And Yanar, I'd love to start off with you again, since you began to allude to that already.
Thank you, Emily. Our group, we focused on assisting women go through a social transformation from victims into defenders. And that was through our operations of women's shelters around Iraq. And it gives me hope when I see the young women who barely can read and write. They immediately feel that their ordeal is in parallel with the ordeal of the whole society. And it only takes them a short time to learn the politics of struggle for a better world, and they stand in the front lines. I've seen many young women who do that right away, and they burn the bridges with the corrupt strong powers in Iraq. Those who, in Iraq, it's well known that we have one of the most corrupt governments in the world. When I speak about the corruption index, I was looking it up this morning. In corruption, we are 157 out of 180. And then when it comes to women, peace, and security index, we are 166 out of 170. I see these young women who have transformed into defenders, not only of other women, but of the society at large. They stand in the front lines, and they are willing to speak out, to demonstrate, to write, to go over media, and to do whatever it takes to show the resistance that we need to have to change this world. Whatever the so-called war on Iraq that came by the name of democracy, it has brought us the other things, starting from corruption to oppression to medieval mentality governments. And it's up to us again to build those new bloods in the movement, and to be on the front line, and to speak fearlessly about what they expect their future to be like. Not to be afraid, not to hesitate, and to know that when you save yourself, you save the whole society. And that's what I hear from the young women who have graduated from our shelters, and they are within the movement that is struggling towards freedom and equality. That gives me hope.
Yeah, on the same note, thank you, Yanar. Kind of to tack to your words on women's empowerment, I'd like to kind of turn to Asya and ask you about your contribution and your vision of women's rights and women's empowerment in Russia, maybe kind of post, kind of extending the conversation and probably thinking about the post-war Russia, if you will. What is your take on it? How do you see the world in the future, kind of drawing upon your experience in women's empowerment?
In the situation when you can't know what will happen tomorrow, it's really hard to predict or have any vision of what can happen. As for hope and strategy, I think that when you confront with the powers, with big powers, which are not interested in peace and in improving peace-building movements, the hope is the only strategy and the only plan which can move you ahead. And as for my contribution, for now, as a psychologist, I am working with human rights defenders and activists which were affected by war. And by helping them, I help them to improve their activities, and they became able to do their work. Because when you see that they are affected, they experience traumas, burnouts, and other psychological difficulties, which are the which hinder their work. And by helping them, I help them to improve their activities and work.
Great, thank you so much, Asya. I'd like to turn back to Lindsay to talk a little bit more maybe about what the Stop the War Coalition and other work you're engaged in is up to now, or that you're just seeing in Great Britain that gives you hope.
Well, I think the first thing is, I think if you're a peace campaigner and if you're a socialist, if you're any of those things, it's really impossible to engage unless you do have a level of hope. I think you've got to, you've got to be honest about how bad things might be at certain times. We shouldn't pretend that things are necessarily better than they are. But I think we have to try to say, look, it is possible for people to change things, and it is possible, and people have done this a lot in the past, and we can do it again. So I think what we try to do in Stop the War is that we try to keep campaigning over a range of issues. And for example, with this anniversary, we've done a number of things. We're going to do an event on the anniversary of the war itself in March. We do various things at various times over racism and Islamophobia and refugees. And the point that has been made, I think, is very important about the way in which refugees are treated when they are people who have been the victims of war in many, many cases, and are treated in different ways, depending on the color of their skin or where they come from or their religion or any of those sorts of things. But I think one of the things we are doing now is calling for peace in Ukraine. And this is quite controversial. I'm sure it's controversial with a number of colleagues here, finding some of the same arguments. And people say, well, surely we shouldn't be calling for peace because this will just help Putin. And my argument is that the war is just going to, the sending of weapons and the continuation of the war is actually not going to help the Ukrainian people. It's going to make things much, much worse. So we have a demonstration coming up on the 25th, which there's a number of international demonstrations taking place. But just in terms of the hope with individuals, I mean, I'm always struck at how many people do not accept the narrative of their government, of the media, of all these different sorts of people, sometimes in very difficult conditions. But I'm quite struck that there is very much a sentiment against war in Britain because people know the experience of Iraq and Afghanistan. They know the terrible situation that people have faced and are now refugees. So we've got lots of people who want to campaign over this. We have students and we have school students, and we have young people who are doing all those sorts of things, but also people of my generation who are still campaigning over this, and who, all right, you can say, well, they've just been doing the same thing for 50 years or even longer sometimes. But actually, to me, that's an inspiration as well, because if you have principles, then you have to try and stick to those principles. And even if you don't win over a majority, at least you can keep putting those arguments. And I very often think if we hadn't existed, if other peace campaigners hadn't existed, CND we work with closely, the Muslim Association of Britain we work with closely, with all these things, if we hadn't existed, how much worse might that war have been, and how many more subsequent wars might there have been? So I think, you can't prove a negative and you can't prove a counterfactual, but I think it's important to think about that. Sometimes you get, are we really making a difference? Are we getting anywhere? Does anybody agree with us? And I think we all have those feelings if you're a campaigner, it's kind of normal that you have those feelings from time to time, but you do make a difference and you do stand up for what you believe in. And now, how many people say the Iraq war was a good thing? Not very many. How many people say the Vietnam War was a good thing? Virtually nobody. And so it's a horrible thing that you can't win this argument before the wars, but nonetheless, it does shift opinion over a long period of time.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Indeed, I really just an idea crossed my mind. It's that we as campaigners here, and many people who are watching us right now, we really tend to forget that, well, we do make a difference. And like, for example, the it is these social movements that really move the needle. For example, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is basically a product of really hard work of the ICANN, the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons, also a civil movement of people who really care about the abolishing nuclear weapons. They came together, they organized themselves, and really brought about a treaty, the UN treaty that everybody. It's also a controversial document for many countries because we'll see that no nuclear weapon states really accept the treaty. But it should also serve as a reminder for us that, well, campaigning does make a difference. And thank you so much, Lindsay, for pointing that out. And kind of moving on to Ernest, I really wonder what your hopes are. You were very, I would say, critical and, well, rightfully critical. Do you have any hopes at all?
Thank you so much. Yeah. There's one thing I want to say. The only hope I have right now is life, because where there is life, there is hope. And if in life, things work in two sides. Everything happens in two sides. It takes two to do everything. And I keep saying, if bad things can happen, then good things can also happen. If the politician can go and convince the citizen, the poor citizen, or enforce them to do bad things, then I can also, in my own way, influence this another citizen to do some good things. So, in as much as things are not going well, does not mean we will not penetrate through. I believe if I do not have hope, I wouldn't be here speaking right now. And I would not stop fighting until we see peace. And I know it might not be today, it might not be tomorrow. Yeah, but definitely sometime, someday, our words would impact one after the other. And if we keep spreading, and sometime, someday, everything is going to be okay. And there is one more thing, which is about sustainability in Africa. For example, if we come out trying to implement something like most organizations go about, they get funding from other international donors trying to run programs and all things, the programs are being run, but at the end of these programs, what else? They go back to square one, and they would have to start again. Yeah, but I would insist on sensitization and educating the youth, And so with me, what I am starting from my own perspective or my own small way is to enlighten the youth through our organizations. It's not easy though, because whilst you are fighting on the right hand, the other person is also fighting, counter-crossing you from the left side. Yeah, but what is needed most here is sensitization and educating the youth, because these are the future leaders. If we are able to pick, I am able to educate 5 youth from the right side, 5 from the left side, who also continue like a food chain, I am very sure sometime, someday, positive things will start coming out from somewhere. And as much as things are not going well, it does not mean everyone is in the deep shit, but it means somehow, if I would have an idea to think of peace and progress, then I can imagine the hundreds of people somewhere who have the same ideas. It's all about looking for these people and also organizing sensitization and educational programs to educate these people, because you cannot buy a car for a carpenter to drive, because a carpenter who is not trained in driving cannot drive the car. He will only have an accident with it. So what I'm trying to say is if the citizen, the ordinary citizen, do not know what peace is about, if they do not know the essence of peace, and you go telling them peace, 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 do this, you give them even instruments, to pursue peace, they would mishandle it. But if we are able to get them well educated on the ground and they understand the concept, they would, even in their own ways, bring innovative ideas, which would help us, especially starting from the rural parts of our countries. You know, it is more severe over there than in the cities where we are. So I would sum it up by saying there is hope. So I see a light at the end of the tunnel, and I would not keep fighting until that light shines on everybody. It may not come from me alone, but they said together, we shall make it happen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ernest, for that. I love how many of the responses have kind of included that hopeful piece being working with young people, working to educate young people, because I think that is really key and important to like bridging this kind of intergenerational gap. And I think a lot of the older folks kind of have that gift of hindsight. Like we can now look back 20 years later and see impacts that we couldn't see right in the moment. So hopefully, 20 years from now, I can look back and, feel like I really chiseled away at some of this myself too. So with that, I'd love to turn to Bruno. What are you seeing or doing right now that's giving you hope?
Thanks, Emily, and thanks to all my colleagues that talked before me. I pretty much agree with many of them. And as Lindsay was saying, we as a campaigners, if we don't have hope, we don't wake up in the morning, and we cannot like keep doing this job. But like for me, like two things. I motivate myself with like other movements around the world, and the most interesting things I've been seeing the past years, it's always related with students movements and sometimes together with like women-led movements. Either this is happening in Iran or by the students in Chile. So I believe we have also to try to drain energy for other movements, not just energy, but also lessons learned in terms of strategy, in terms of how they are doing the communication and things like that. So that's, from my perspective, what I try to do in my work. And another thing that I believe it's important is that sometimes if we feel like failure because we are kind of framing the victory as like the end of war, like the only victory. But I believe we should like break down the victories and like cheer and cherish like the smallest victories as well. So if we can stop a weapons transfer that we know can escalate a conflict or make it last longer, this is something that we should be cheering for. If we can like arrange the possibility of human rights corridor to deliver food for victims, this is something that we have to celebrate also. So I believe it's also a mistake for us, like just to frame victory as the end of a conflict or the end of the war, but we have to also like to break down this, and most of all celebrate those smallest wins, because this will give us the energy to keep doing the work that we committed to do. So this will be my contribution.
Thank you so much, Bruno. I just also wanted to remind our participants and our panelists that we have many people watching and even commenting and writing questions, which is really great to see your engagement, especially, and your interest in so many topics. And we've actually covered so many different topics, and I really wonder what each and every one of you would want our participants to take away with them today, because we're kind of moving towards the end of our conversation. And is there anything in particular that when you wake up in the morning, you look yourself in the mirror and you wish that people around you or in your community, or maybe those outside your community, understood or had better, awareness of something, very probably specific, or something that really goes back to your passion, your work, just to kind of make it more personal and address our participants who are watching right now. Yanar, could you please start?
I think somebody mentioned part of it before, and I'm gonna elaborate on it. The fact that we're challenging and we're going against the mainstream puts our life under tremendous pressure from the closest people to us. And at some points, the enemies portray us as the criminals, as somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. And we don't get the support or the praise that we deserve. Never to let this stop our work, never to let this stop our motivation, and to keep on being the stubborn activists and believers of freedom and equality that we do. You know what, I speak this while this morning I was telling one of your organizers that there was just I mean, the police are trying to come and get me and my colleagues to put us in prison just because we are standing against the government in Iraq and telling them that you're mistreating women. So they try to put the crimes on us and they do everything to intimidate us and to stop us from doing what we're doing. Never stop what you're doing and keep on believing in yourself, and it will happen at some point. You know what? We, all of us, have seen a few steps take place, but eventually this journey will reach to a good place. Never to lose hope.
Thank you so much, Yanar. And yes, really glad that you were able to join us this morning. I know there was questions of whether you could, and I'm just so grateful that you could be here today and share your insights with us. I'd like to turn it next to Lindsay. What would you like our participants to take away from you today?
Well, similar to Yanar, really, I think there's the old slogan, which is, what is it? Educate, agitate, and organize. And I think that's a pretty good one that to start off with, you know, that we've all got to try to get across to people what the truth of the situation is, because people are so uninformed or misinformed, or they're told that this war is in the interest of the whole of the British people or the American people or whatever it is. And I think the first thing is we can do a tremendously important job, even small numbers of us, in getting across the alternative view. And lots of people, we've heard Noam Chomsky, you know, just brilliantly describing exactly the role of the US in Iraq and Fallujah and so on. And we need much, much more of that sort of thing. Agitate, we have to be on the streets where it's necessary, we have to campaign, we have to do all these sorts of things. And that means that we have to organize ourselves, we have to organize alongside people who kind of think the same way that we do, in whatever the best way of organizing is. We've got to do it internationally, and that's why these events are so important, that we can organize internationally. And one of the great things about, compared to even 20 years ago, is that you can have these sorts of meetings which didn't exist really, or certainly not for the mass of people to be able to do them. So I think we do all these sorts of things, and it does give you hope that when you organize, even if the small numbers of people, they begin to say, yeah, okay, you're right about this, and we can do this, and we can campaign. And that's where we have to start, and that's how you build big movements. You can't always build a big movement, but you won't build a big movement unless you do all those sorts of things, because any movement is made up of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and hopefully millions of people, as it was in 2003, saying no and saying we're not going to accept this. And that's always what we have to have in our mind.
Great, thank you so much, Lindsay. Yeah, great phrase, evergreen. Really appreciate those contributions. And I was going to say the same thing. I think probably one of the best things we have now that we didn't 20 years ago are platforms like Zoom, where we can have international meetings and conferences like this, and meet with so many different perspectives from around the world. So thank you again. And I'd love to give it next to Asya. What would you like our participants to take away today?
As for the hope and talking about what empowers me in my work and in my activities, I can say that it's just one thought or one value. I can say that it's like a lifestyle. When you when you feel yourself, I think when you find peace inside of yourself, it's easier to give this peace and to support other people in it. And when I see the results of my work, when I see that what I do is really helpful for some people, it really motivates. Also, when I see my colleagues and other activists from other countries, other cultures, and when they share their thoughts, opinions from other perspectives, it's also enrich myself. So even the situation isn't quite good. I think that these small things like supporting each other, seeing even a small results of your work, they empower us and gives hope. So I can say that I have like a big recipe for supporting the hope. And I think it's important also to take care about ourselves, because sometimes we need to find the power and to hope for helping other people. I think it's a critical point.
That's very well said, Asya. That's actually what I was gonna point out, is a lot of us might feel burned out at some point, and we feel that we really don't want to keep going. And at that moment, we really kind of stop and start really wondering if we're doing the right thing. And I think that, well, everyone who's here and watching us, and many people out there are doing the right thing. And we should kind of remind ourselves the same, it should be a mantra that we repeat every day, which I usually do, because, well, if you don't do it, where are you going to end up, right? And I also would like to add on to that, well, everyone these days can be a campaigner. You don't have to be certified. You don't have to really, have a PhD or even join an organization. You can really campaign on your own. You can use your platforms, social media. You can give lectures. You can even be a campaigner among your friends, which I think nowadays is really kind of, gaining traction. And I see a lot of my friends kind of turning into campaigners among our friend group. And I think this is something that we all are witnessing today. And Ernest, what's your take on this? Can you please share some of your insights too?
Thank you. And when I sleep and I wake up in the morning, I look at myself and I could only say one thing, that if I don't do it, who can do it? I wake up and I see a lot of critics around me. Then I look at these critics who will be criticizing you even when you are doing the right thing. Sometimes you ask yourself, what am I doing wrong? But the question is, in as much as these people are criticizing, I have sisters and brothers, growing sisters and brothers. And I always take every man as my brother and every woman as my sister, that if we are not able to stand up to do this, who can? Now, the question is, there are a lot of young men and women who are trying to come out to do something. But I believe someday, my words could urge someone to also start something in their own small way. So, as we are moving on, I can always say one thing to the younger generations coming, that they should always embrace critics, because I always use these examples as our friends can only chill with us, they can only party with us, they can only have fun with us. But the one criticizing you is seeing something different about you. How about you concentrate on this person for a minute, even if it is not correct, or whatever they are criticizing you of is not right, you look into it, you can see something else, you can see something different from it. So critics makes us grow, even though it's not pleasant standing to see people criticizing you all over. But when you see people talking at you like that, you should have a confidence to admit to yourself, especially when you are wrong, and accept and learn and grow. Then my message to Yana is, I took up this challenge to fight for myself and from the generations to come, to leave a legacy. If our forefathers were able to do something better for us, it would have been much easier for us to continue. But at this point, we have to start it. So even if they arrest you and they take you to jail, don't forget, I don't believe in mistakes or coincidences. Everything happens for a purpose. If you should be taken to jail, you should know that you are taken there to continue preaching the word over there, because there is somebody there who needs you to make a difference. So forget about it, wherever they would take you. But just put in your mind, wherever they take you is the right place for you to be. It is not a coincidence. And I just want to say thank you to everybody, and I really appreciate it. I came on this platform because someone wasn't able to make it, and I appreciate the fact that I found myself here. And as I'm here, I'm also thinking of how I can continue this initiative in Africa by organizing this and also getting speakers all over Africa for us to come back in the next phase to continue pursuing the cause of peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernst, for tuning in. We also appreciate you and your comments today. Very, very powerful and indeed memorable. And now over to Bruno. What would you want our participants to kind of remember? Maybe what's like your message would be to the audience today?
Thanks, and I want to take the chance also to thank again IPP and also our amazing moderators today, Ivan and Emily. I want to second first Asia message about self-care. I believe this is super important, and we have to respect ourselves when we are not feeling well, when we are feeling de-energized. We can help others if we are not well. So this is something like really important that we should do without feeling bad about it. And another thing that I believe we didn't have the chance to mention, but I also think it's very useful that we in our countries have to try our best to discuss like the armed structures. So if we are funding the armed force, the Ministry of Defense or law enforcement agencies, we have to be able to discuss their priorities and their investments and things like that. I feel like, and maybe US is a good example, there's also need for these structures to say that they are relevant and they are needed. So war is always a good, new wars and new conflicts are always good excuses for to keep maintaining these structures. And we can discuss this in the local level as well. So we have seen lots of, for example, law enforcement agencies that were dedicated to tackling drugs, that when the drug reform happens and the drug policy changes, these structures will resist to start doing the work they are doing. So I believe this is also something that we have to, sometimes we're like focusing a lot on the conflict itself, but it's also good to have this kind of discussion internally. And I believe this is something very needed. And I want to thank again the invitation. I learned a lot today with exchanges, and I hope the audience has learned too.
Great. Thank you so much, Bruno. And thank you again to all of our just absolutely incredible panelists, Yanar, Lindsay, Asya, Bruno, Ernest, my wonderful co-moderator, Ivan, who I will give the floor to in a little bit. I think it's very clear and apparent that we are facing so many challenges right now, some of which we didn't even really have time to delve into, but that we're all clearly aware of, like the climate crisis, this impending threat of nuclear destruction. The stakes I think right now are higher than ever with this rise of fascism. Many folks, the personal stakes are very high, are being chased down by the police being a very clear example of that. I think that it's just really such a blessing to get to be here with all of you today to talk about the current state of the movement, which we all know is pretty abysmal, but also talk about what keeps you going, both as individuals and in this work for the long haul. So I am just so grateful for everyone's contributions and reminders that we need to take care of ourselves as well, and that we're not doing it alone. We're doing it not just as movements within our countries even, but as an international group of people focused on this. So thanks again to IPB for convening all of this together. And yeah, Ivan, any last words you want to add?
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. Yes, indeed, I've enjoyed this very much. And it is maybe just a drop in the sea, you know, our conversation, less than 2 hours, Wednesday night, Wednesday morning for someone, but it definitely means a lot for a lot of people today, those watching and those who will watch this video later on. And I really want to thank you from the deepest part of my heart for your contribution and for coming here tonight, even when the circumstances really were not cooperating. Yes, thank you so much.
Great. With that, I guess I'm not sure if Sean or Teo have any like closing words, so I'll pass it back to you, but thank you again. And once again, round of applause for our amazing lineup of panelists.
Thank you so much to our moderators and speakers in our final panel. Thank you to everyone who has joined us today, whether to speak or listen in, to ask thought-provoking and very interesting questions throughout the session as well, which we will share as well with the speakers from today in case anyone would like to reach out or expand on what has been discussed here today. We are now at the end of our event. Just to say, we do have a recording of this webinar, which will be available on the IPB YouTube channel sometime tomorrow or at the latest on Friday. And these are the first two parts of our event, but we do have one more part. I imagine most of those who are still with us will be asleep at this time, but in case you are awake, tomorrow at 7 a.m. Central European Time, we will have a third part of this conversation, which will focus a bit more on the Asia Pacific region in particular, including speakers from the Philippines, South Korea, Australia, and Guam, and including musical and artistic performances throughout. If you are unable to make that event but are interested, we will also have that on our YouTube channel within the coming days. So we will encourage you to check those out. And just as a closing thank you from the International Peace Bureau. We are a small nonprofit that can put together great events because we have really an amazing network. So thank you to all of those who are in our network. And if you would like to support our work so that we can do more webinars like this, please also consider donating to the International Peace Bureau. The information is on our website, www.ipb.org. Thanks again, and have a wonderful evening or rest of your day.